Imagine sitting at your kitchen table, and the two people who are supposed to protect you are handing you a pen and a legal document that would strip away your entire future. My name is Morgan, and 3 months ago, my stepmother, Sarah, sat me down with a cold smile while my father stood behind her like a silent guard. They wanted me to sign over the $450,000 trust fund my mother had left for me when she passed away. It's for the family, Morgan, Sarah whispered, her eyes darting toward the designer watch on her wrist, a watch I knew was bought with debt. Your mother would have wanted us to stay on our feet. We're a unit now. My father didn't look me in the eye. He just crossed his arms and added, "She's right, honey. We're drowning in the mortgage, and that money is just sitting there. You're only 17. You don't need that kind of weight on your shoulders." But here's what they didn't know. My mother, Elaine, was a 4th grade teacher who spent her life planning for every possible what-if. She knew my father better than he knew himself. She knew about the business trips that weren't for business, and she knew exactly what kind of woman Sarah was long before she ever moved into our house. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I remembered what my mom always told me: sometimes, silence is the loudest thing you can say. I simply looked at the document, then looked at them, and walked out of the room. The next morning, I didn't bring them a signed paper. Instead, I handed them a sealed, wax-stamped envelope from my mother's attorney. Inside that envelope wasn't just a legal no. It was a confession from beyond the grave that would make my father realize his entire new life was built on a foundation of sand. What did the letter say about my father's secret life? And why did my mother wait until this exact moment to reveal the truth? My father's hands shook as he tore the wax seal. Sarah hovered over his shoulder, her eyes hungry for the yes she assumed was inside. But as my father began to read, the color didn't just leave his face, it felt like his entire soul evaporated. The letter wasn't a bank authorization or a signature. It was a diary entry from the last 3 months of my mother's life, and it was addressed directly to him. "Dear Richard," it began. "I know that as you read this, you are likely standing in the kitchen we picked out together, perhaps with the woman you've been seeing while I was in the hospital." The room went deathly silent. Sarah's grip on the back of the chair tightened until her knuckles turned white. My mother, the quiet school teacher everyone thought was too exhausted from chemotherapy to notice her surroundings, had seen everything. She knew about the late nights at the office and the emergency meetings that were actually candlelit dinners at expensive bistros. She had documented every single lie, every missed appointment, and every dollar my father had siphoned from their joint savings to buy Sarah's affection. But the letter held an even sharper edge. My mother hadn't just watched, she had prepared. She knew my father's secret gambling habit had spiraled out of control and that he was counting on my $450,000 inheritance to bail him out of a hole he'd dug himself. The attorney's note attached to the letter was the final blow. The trust fund wasn't just locked away, it was protected by a predatory clause. If any attempt was made to coerce me into signing it over before my 18th birthday, the entire fund would immediately transfer to a private educational trust, and my father would be legally evicted from the house, a house my mother had purchased with her own family's inheritance. My father looked at me, tears finally spilling over. They weren't tears of regret for my mother, they were tears of terror for his own future. Sarah, realizing the golden goose had just flown away, didn't offer him comfort. She did something much colder, proving that my mother's warnings were more accurate than we ever imagined. What was Sarah's true motive, and why did my father's perfect second marriage crumble in less than 60 seconds? Part 3. The Wine Cellar Secret. Sarah didn't offer my father a shoulder to cry on. She didn't even look at him with a shred of sympathy. Instead, she let out a sharp, jagged laugh that cut through the tension like a blade. "You told me it was a sure thing, Richard," she hissed, her voice dropping the sweet act entirely. "You said the girl was a pushover. You said the money was practically ours." In that single moment, the illusion of their perfect romance shattered. My father sat there, a hollow shell of a man, realizing he had traded my mother's years of devotion for a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a failing investment. But while they began a screaming match that rattled the kitchen windows, I remembered the final line of my mother's letter. "Morgan, look behind the loose brick in the wine cellar. Not for money, but for the truth." I slipped away from the chaos and headed into the basement. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth. I found the brick. It was marked with a small, carved heart, my mother's signature. Behind it sat a small digital recorder and a folder of printed emails. As I pressed play, I heard Sarah's voice, clear and chilling, talking to a man I didn't recognize. "I've got him hooked," Sarah said on the recording. "Once the kid signs over the trust, we clear your gambling debt and we're out of here. Richard is a fool. He thinks I actually love him. He has no idea I've been tracking their bank accounts since Claire was first diagnosed." My stomach turned. Sarah wasn't just a gold digger. She was a professional predator who had targeted my family when we were at our most vulnerable. She had been waiting for my mother to die so she could swoop in and pick the bones clean. But as I scrolled through the emails, I found something even more devastating. Evidence that Sarah had been working with my father's own business partner to sabotage his company from the inside. I realized then that I wasn't just holding my inheritance. I was holding the evidence that could destroy Sarah's entire life. What happens when I walk back upstairs and play that recording in the middle of their fight? And what is the final gift my mother left in the trust that ensures Sarah leaves with absolutely nothing? I walked back into the kitchen, the digital recorder gripped tightly in my palm. The shouting match between Richard and Sarah was at its peak, but the moment the audio began to play, the room turned into a tomb. Sarah's own voice, stripped of its sugary facade, filled the space. She spoke about Richard with such contempt, calling him a useful idiot and detailing her plan to vanish with his business partner once my trust fund was drained. My father looked like he had been struck by lightning. He turned to Sarah, his mouth hanging open, waiting for a denial that never came. Instead, Sarah just rolled her eyes, grabbed her coat, and checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Well, the game's up," she said with a shrug. "Honestly, Richard, did you really think someone like me would settle for a man who couldn't even stand up to his own daughter?" She didn't get the clean break she expected. As she opened the front door, she was met by my mother's attorney and a local sheriff. My mother hadn't just left a letter. She had filed a preemptive report regarding financial and minor abuse. Because Sarah had actively conspired to defraud a protected trust, she wasn't just leaving. She was being escorted to a precinct for questioning. As for my father, the predatory clause in the house deed was final. Since he had attempted to coerce me, he forfeited his right to live in the estate. He had 30 days to pack his life into boxes. He stood in the driveway as I drove away that final morning, looking small and grey, a man who had traded his soul for a lie and ended up with nothing. I am 18 now. I'm sitting in my own apartment near campus, my mother's gold bracelet catching the light on my wrist. I have the $450,000, but more importantly, I have the peace she fought so hard to give me. She taught me that you don't have to scream to be powerful. You just have to be prepared. If you've ever had to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to love you, drop a MY turn in the comments. Your strength is your greatest inheritance. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience.